Good afternoon, all of you people who are joining us virtually. It's always pleasure to see you, to see some of you, and always pleasure to interact with Abilash from PrivaSapien. So today we have a sort of like a very special session with Abilash, right? So this is largely fusion of AI and privacy. Although essentially privacy has evolved so much, I think with the DPDP, GDPR, and everything else that is happening in that space, there's enough traction, and there's also quite a bit of traction in the airspace. But what we've seen is essentially when companies and enterprises sort of tries to adopt AI in their context, this sort of there are a lot of things that they need to be mindful of. They need to keep in mind. Also, regulations are trying to catch up to this. So to understand what is happening in this domain, I've invited Abhilash for a quick chat with all of us. Abilash is CEO of PrivaSapien. He's been engaged with privacy for many years, and certainly with DSCI. With that, I would like to extend my very warm welcome to Abilash, and Abilash, welcome. And I'm quite excited to see what we have in store in the next 45, 50 odd minutes or so.
Absolutely. Pleasure for being here, Teja. Thank you so much for hosting me. Looking forward to the conversation. AI is like a really hot area. While we all got exposed to Gen AI, there are a lot of challenges with regulations coming as well, and organizations have to balance between innovation and compliance. And as Honorable Prime Minister Modi says, India has to tread a path which is at the balance of technology and law,
Mm,
which empowers the citizen, and not a path like slightly different path from Europe, where while the regulations are strong and came first,
mm,
India takes approach of um, understanding the implications of technology and people,
mm,
and what is the right balance and what kind of solutions are possible, and like also a different path than US, which is more of really on the, especially on these areas, more on the commercial side of things.
mm,
So how can it be the right balance of ensuring people are given the right kind of solutions, innovations are fostered, accelerated with right kind of technology solutions, is I think a very good thought process that India has. I think we have a very unique value proposition globally. So
mm.
great to see the topic. Looking forward to contribute.
Okay, that's amazing. Right. So essentially, Abhilash, let me start by asking this very fundamental question, right? So I still vividly remember when essentially beta.openai.com essentially launched into public, right? I think, one of this first million odd people who used that platform, right? I remember most of us essentially started by asking it to write a poem or something, right? But from that point in time to now, I mean, just a couple of days before, I've seen essentially like Claude launching this Sonnet 4, and then it's kind of crazy. I mean, I saw one person comment saying on Reddit or somewhere, "Okay, essentially, look, it the tool is so powerful. He found an issue that he spent 200 hours. He's a very senior engineer and still couldn't fix it, right? But and same goes with, let's say, Cursor or so many other platforms. So enterprise is not just using the commercially available tools, but also essentially adopting AI, implementing their own AI tools, right? Gen AI tools in their own context, right? This seems quite logical, right? But how different is enterprise adoption of AI compared to, like for general regular consumption that we all use? How is that? How are these both different?
Absolutely. Great question. I think we are bang on target to start with. So this is like, so whatever we are doing till now in Gen AI, right, is like blogs that we created in the internet era when the internet first came, right? Everybody had a blog page, everybody wanted to have a web page, everybody wanted to have a location for themselves. Businesses also began start putting very simple pages. You do dial up
Mhm,
modem and then connect to the internet and then see, right? While everybody had the you can have a blog. There were things like Blogspot and all, where we used to post
Yeah.
blogs and things like those.
Yeah. Yeah.
From there to think of putting a bank, right? When you are doing an online banking,
Mm,
it's a completely different ball game, right? Putting
mm,
a blog, writing, okay, I went there, I saw these pictures, this place was very good, amazing, right? There is no risk involved in that. You write whatever. There are risks that we are understanding now in terms of privacy and all, but typically in a blog there was not much of risk. But when you are putting a banking system online, right,
mm,
it's a huge risk, and it took a lot of time from the early internet days to a banking era, when
mm,
enterprise adoption actually took place and transactions, e-commerce happened on internet, right? It was like magic, and it was very risky as well, because you are doing transaction online. You don't know whom you are paying. You don't know how it is gonna work, right? And then there are real risks and challenges. Today we have leapfrogged in. It is very similar in the Gen AI case as well. We have
mhm.
seen that our children are using Gen AI, and then they are asking to paint a picture, write a poem,
Yeah.
tell stories, whatever, right? So these things are fine. But from
Mm,
there, when we are saying that, okay, enterprise, you write a, insurance underwriting for
mm,
$1 million transaction, or you see whether I can approve a loan, or is this the right kind of code for my enterprise, which is going to
mm,
run, probably core banking applications.
mm.
um, it's a very, very different level of risk, and you don't know where the data is going, who is using the data, what is coming out of it. Do organizations even have IP? I don't know. Every emails are being, people first write it, vet it on ChatGPT, and then they send emails nowadays. Right? So the the risk of your IP, an organization's IP, which
Mm,
is considered one of the core important information. Similarly, confidential information of an organization, sensitive information of customers. Now there are literally no boundaries. This is how internet was like 40 years ago.
mm, mm,
It's pretty much the same, just that the framework and the layer in the stack has changed, but the
mm.
risk and the problems are pretty much the same, because enterprises need to assure certain level of guarantees in terms
Correct.
of security, privacy. They have regulations which are managed, which are not the case in a B2C ecosystem significantly, right? People want to do
Mhm,
whatever they want. Like, there is no obligations as such, unless there is a regulation for the service provider in that domain, which is the space in
mm.
which we are, right? There is no regulation. But for enterprises, there are higher levels of obligations and higher level of regulation, while even the model providers have obligations, but that is very, very far in the horizon. But existing industry verticals have stronger regulatory obligations, right? Even from IT Act, it is directly applicable for let's say a bank or an insurance company, or a healthcare organization. They have significant amount of regulatory obligation. Can they send sensitive
Mm,
data to external large language model sitting in US? Well, I don't know. A lot of challenges come in, right?
mm.
Can they? Do they know that this data is going to an? Does end user know? With privacy coming in, right? The model can understand. Okay, this is the exact user. Okay, Teja is
Mm.
like trying to go to Maldives for a vacation, and he is going to spend this time with this person, right?
Oh
Because the
no.
way you are going to chat, right? The way you are going, we were having conversation with the customer, and they were telling that, okay, we are going for, it gave a good itinerary and all. But the problem is that this information is available to an external model,
Correct.
right? And external model, this may be a transaction related information, disease related information.
Mm.
It can be, confidential information
Yeah.
which is under NDA for your organization. It is
Correct.
all going to an external party. Now you
Mm,
don't know what the external party would do with that information, right?
correct.
They can train a model, probably they can sell the data to a third party.
Mhm.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
Even so when there are breach obligations on the
Mm,
personal data, right, that this data, if it gets breached, then it can go up to 250 crore penalty if you don't do without technical
mhm.
safeguards. These are live examples of what are challenges that enterprises have, right?
Hmm.
Of what data is going outside their ecosystem. And when it comes to sensitive data or any personal data for that matter, any inappropriate usage is considered as a breach. Unauthorized storing, processing, sharing, doing analytics on top of it beyond consent and things like those, all of them are considered as breach. The very definition of breach is very, very wide. So when an organization is putting a chatbot in its service,
Hmm.
just it's very simple today, right? You put a wrapper and then
Hmm.
call OpenAI at the
Yeah.
backend, or call DeepSeek at the backend. You don't know, right?
Hmm.
So you don't know whether the data is going to US or Europe or France, or it's going to China. You don't know. So there is significant amount of principles which have to be put in place, like privacy, safety, security, fairness, explainability, transparency. These are the principles of responsible AI. Without this, if a enterprise gets into any of the services, then it can result in huge penalties for the enterprise.
Hmm. Okay, that's
And this is
interesting,
a
right? So it's hmm.
fundamental difference. Yeah, this is a very fundamental difference, and this is what enterprise have to be cognizant of.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I mean, what we've seen is that once sort of people start to use the Gen AI in their, let's say, day-to-day work or day-to-day life, it's very difficult to sort of like go back to not using Gen AI in their context, right? But also, it's quite interesting that you brought out the point. Essentially, people are definitely using. I mean, we all seen this. What happened in the earlier when the Gen AI first started coming into being. I think one of the very large phone manufacturers IP is completely out because of the employee use of Gen AI, and that underscores the impact that you just mentioned about, right? So, but Abhilash, if I have to ask you, are there any regulatory requirements and around usage of Gen AI in the enterprise segment?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And there are multiple geographies have multiple regulations. And
Mm.
if we start with India, right?
Mhm.
Um, See, at the end of the day, Gen AI is a technology tool, right? It gives a better, more informed output.
Mm.
But other than that, everything else is already there as a regulatory requirement for you. For example,
Mm.
let's say RBI requirements of what data can go
Correct.
to whom.
Mm.
Right? For example, if a customer puts a credit card number and then says that I lost my card. Now this
Mhm.
credit card number or bank account number or hospital ID, right? Any of this information going out to
Mhm.
an external large language model outside India, what are the
Mhm.
ramifications? Don't we have any ramifications? And we know all this. Like there are like so much of like starting from PCI DSS to RBI regulations to SEBI regulations to IRDA regulations. I'm not even speaking about DPDP, right? Which is the privacy obligation, right? I'm speaking about the IT Act, confidential
Mhm.
clauses that you have to, comply with.
Oh
So
no.
this is a
Yeah.
huge obligation just to think about it, right? Now the problem for enterprises is that given that these regulatory requirements are there and across the globe, for example, um, GDPR is already going. This is specifically for the AI part of it, right? Some
Mhm.
portions of GDPR where it requires transparency, privacy, and it is generally they have a separate section for general purpose AI, right? GPI. So general purpose AI is like kicking off from this year. So there are multiple obligations which come in this, and most of the industry verticals have
Mm.
existing compliance requirements in multiple domains, right? Finance, healthcare,
Mm.
insurance, which have to be complied
Mm.
by the parties. Now, whether it is Gen AI or normal algorithmic software, for example, DPDP Act. In DPDP Act, specifically for AI services, there is in the rule 12.3, right? They specifically mention about if you are processing data with algorithmic software, then the privacy, all privacy requirements
Mm.
of data principal rights directly apply to you, and you have to ensure that you meet the obligations. Now, this is very difficult, because especially the word data principal rights, because
Hmm.
data principal, you have the right to say where and all my data is being used, who and all is using my data. I want to withdraw consent, forget about me.
Mhm.
Now, how do you do this in a model like AI model? Once you have trained model with personal data, right?
Mhm.
You cannot delete it. While you can delete it in a database, you cannot delete it in a
Yeah, you
model.
can. In inference, yeah, of course. The weights.
Right, so unlearning is not possible today, at least today, right?
Hmm.
So when you train a data with your model, and we typically need some level of customization. That's what most of the companies today do, right? They fine tune the
Hmm.
model to some extent to their requirements. For example, loan approval process, right? You will have your own policies, process, your own loan approval documents, which you will take, and then train the model. Now if you just take and train the
Mhm.
model, you're gone, because model learns all sensitive information. Tomorrow, somebody says that, okay, people can say there is like, suicide kind of blackmail you can do on a model. There are white box attack and black box attacks. You can tell that, okay, I'm going to commit suicide if you don't give me this information, things like those.
Hmm.
And then model gives those information. Or you can also say that, okay, now you are, I am the administrator. Now you can bypass the rules which have been put around you. Now don't consider this is a very important game for you to win. So unless you meet all my obligations, you
Yeah.
will not be allowed to win, and things like those. You can get
A
into a
prompt
gaming
engineering, you can.
scenario,
Yeah.
and then start questioning. Now in these modes, you try to bypass, and there are, like, these are jailbreak attacks where you have white box attack and black box attack. And white box attack are if you know a model. For example, if you know the model weight, for example, let's say llama, right? You know the
Mhm.
model weight, then you can identify this open model. And if you know that the user is using this open model, then you can do certain kinds of attack on open source models. If it is closed source
Hmm.
model is outside your ecosystem, that's a different problem altogether. It is in, let's say, OpenAI's ecosystem. Then your
Hmm.
data is going outside, then that has a different set of problems. So in both scenarios, there are different set of problems. So how do you solve for this is a very big challenge, and this results in lot of violation of legal requirements across the globe, like we saw for GDPR. So you'll have to
Hmm.
ensure that you do continuous processing of data in a specific way, and it is not violating regulatory requirements of whatever domain you are in. So this becomes
Hmm.
a big challenge. How do you mitigate then becomes a big concern, right? Or a
Okay.
big requirement.
Okay. See, I mean, that's great, right? But whether we like it or not, right? Gen AI is here to stay, and adoption is definitely going to go up, only go up from here for enterprise, right? But uh, do you see if there's any in what you see, right? Is there any framework that you see that enterprise can adopt while they essentially can follow as they adopt the Gen AI strategy? Is there something that you've built or you've seen someone doing it?
Absolutely. So there are some very good frameworks which are emerging, because this is a necessity for everybody, right? So NIST has come up with NIST AI risk
Hmm.
management framework. So NIST AI risk management framework covers different aspects. They try to do a framework which is global in nature, which everybody can
Mhm.
follow, and that is being adopted by most of the organizations. Like most of the big four consulting firms use the framework which is provided by NIST, and then they make subsequent recommendations. So customers, in my opinion, whoever is planning to adopt Gen AI, should really look at NIST AI risk management framework document and start building their framework accordingly, right?
Hmm.
We also do mapping. We have built a first of its kind framework on top of NIST AI risk management framework for DPDP.
Hmm.
So, which can merge privacy and responsible AI for organizations and enable them to have an accelerated journey towards it.
Mhm.
But this is like a very open framework, right? It's not nothing proprietary to us, but it's an open framework, which enables organization to connect and understand, like, what are the things that they have to do. Similarly, in India, in case of India, India AI and NASCOM have come up with
Mhm.
responsible AI playbook.
Mm-hmm.
So that is pretty comprehensive, and it tries to capture the obligations. It is bit more implementational, which is like much more pragmatic. So it takes this framework and tries to see how organizations can implement it in different phases of lifestyle, AI life cycle across the enterprise. For example, there are four important stages, and this can apply for traditional AI as well as Gen AI. So in terms of um, stages, it has like four specific stages, which is conceptualization as the first
Mm-hmm.
stage, followed by data collection, then model training and model deployment, and what are the obligations in different stages, right? So that's also a good framework, and there are multiple other frameworks in terms of Saudi Arabia has a ethical AI framework, right? There are frameworks being built on GDPR, and some of the
Mm-hmm.
data protection boards actually are putting out some recommendations on top of it in the European ecosystem. OECD has a high level structure on Gen AI. So these things are shaping up, and these are going to be very very critical. So for India, I think a combination of the NIST AI risk management framework plus India AI's responsible AI playbook is a good combination to start.
Okay. 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 Okay, I mean, sorry, I think probably issue on my end. The video sort of freezes sometimes, so I thought you're still speaking. All right, so
Okay.
Abhilash, so as essentially enterprises, I mean, now that they've decided ki chalo, we have to adopt this Gen AI in their context, right? So, do you see essentially them taking different stages according to the size of organization, according to their industry that they use? Do you see essentially what are the stages of sort of like this Gen AI adoption in an enterprise, if you can tell us?
Yeah. So there are different stages and different types
Mm-hmm.
in the adoption. For example, small companies, they McKinsey has a very good framework of takers, shapers, and makers.
Mm-hmm.
So takers are people who do API calls to external large language models, right? Shapers are people who take organizations who take open models, fine tune it,
Mm-hmm.
and deploy it for their requirements.
Yeah.
Those are shapers, and makers are typically these large companies like the Metas and the Googles of the world who build their own LLM models. Right now, agentic is changing these significantly. We'll come to that later. Um, but before that, as we were discussing in the previous question, there are different stages. Now these are personas are kind of companies, taker, shaper, and maker, right? And then when they are actually doing this process, you have you first have to start with conceptualization of what are you going to do, and then for that, if you are a taker, then even then you will have to understand what kind of data is going to go there, and accordingly plan your strategy. If you're a shaper, then you need to do data collection, understand the risk in data, mitigate the risk in data, and then deploy the model. If you are a maker, then you will have a significant volume of data,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
You will have to take the whole of internet and then your own data, right? And then there are techniques like MLM which you'll have to do for initial model training, and then you will have to further optimize it for specific requirements, and then see how it is going. Or so there are different kind of challenges in different approaches, and budget would naturally for these two approaches, taker would be very very minimal. You just make a API call at the back end, put a wrapper in the front, you are done. um, or shaper, you need to it significantly accelerates your requirement, because now you will have to have a ML engineering team, you need to do data collection, you will have to do model training, but not at the size of makers of the model, but shapers still,
Yeah.
because you are going to change the model parameters, so it's going to still have a decent level of impact, but for makers it's going to be very very high. So So when this happens, along with um, different kind of requirements within an organization across the life cycle, how do you solve for it in each of these stages is how you should look at it. So you should ask, am I a taker, shaper, or maker, right, as an enterprise? And then in that, what stage am I in? Am I in a
Hmm.
conception stage, data collection stage, model training stage, or model deployment stage? And
Hmm.
then for this, what are the things that you should do, right? So if we
Okay.
have this perspective, then it becomes much more easier for us to approach Gen AI for enterprises.
Okay. See, I mean, my perspective, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, is essentially most of the organizations that I know, that I've seen at least, essentially starts as being a taker, and then very quickly essentially transform into being a shaper, right? And essentially as they go through this transition, there's still a good amount of learning curve that is involved, right? So, in your experience, right? So, what are some of the efforts that are need to be taken by these organizations as they essentially transition from a taker to maker stage? Let's say, especially in a conceptualization stage.
Got it. So in the conceptual stage, right? Give me.
Hmm.
Yeah. So especially in the conceptualization stage,
Mm-hmm.
what is important is you need to understand the broad contours. Are we using
Hmm.
an internal model or external model?
Hmm.
Is the data sensitive? Are we going to do sometimes? It's only for internal purposes. A lot of times, one more thing is that people do it
Hmm.
for internal scenarios. They don't do
Hmm.
external uses. For
Correct.
example, employees want to understand policy requirements of the company, right?
Correct.
Completely internal, just to experiment how it goes, right?
Yeah.
um Two, you're putting out a WhatsApp chat bot and then you are explaining customer exactly how the sales process works, which is very very complex, right?
Hmm.
So this is sort of the spectrum, right? In
Hmm.
this spectrum, what kind of technical guardrails you need to have and what kind of protections you need to have is a very very complex scenario. We will try to break it down and then make it bit more simpler to understand. Now, in a when you are actually transitioning from a taker to a
Hmm.
shaper, right?
Take up.
There are a lot of challenges. I think that's what you are trying to understand, right? We'll first
Hmm.
look at taker challenges and then we'll go into
Hmm.
shaper challenges. And what is
Hmm.
the benefit of this transition from a risk perspective?
Hmm.
Right? So from a taker perspective, if you're a taker basically means
Hmm.
like open AI. Let's say you are making a API
Yeah.
call to OpenAI, you're putting a
Epic
wrapper.
call. Correct.
Let's say you are a bank, right? You're a bank, you want to do customer service, you want to improve their experience. Now you are putting a wrapper and telling that, hey, you want to visit the branch, rather than visiting the branch, can you ask queries here, right?
Hmm.
Now the problem is, bank people may ask a lot of information about, hey, I did this transaction yesterday, what happened, like it
Hmm.
failed, how do you help service it, right? Now it's a major problem because you cannot expose your entire database to OpenAI, right?
Yeah. Correct.
uh, all you can do is like probably at a process level you can say, okay, these are my process policies. You do a rag with OpenAI and then try understanding what is happening, right? Can I visit a branch, is it open on this day, and things like that. So the
Hmm.
scope is
Hmm.
limited because you cannot expose the data, and it is very
Yeah.
intuitive for you. Like initially you'll
Hmm.
say, oh, I can do this, that, but when you realize that you cannot give this whole bank's data to OpenAI, because for it to run
Hmm.
efficiently you have to do it, it begins to sink in that, okay, this is not going to work out, right? I
Hmm.
can probably tell a customer, welcome to my page with OpenAI, or help them
Hmm.
run through my policies and process through OpenAI. But anything more than that which is related to a user, you cannot send externally. It becomes a problem. Even there are enterprise versions, right? But even in enterprise versions of OpenAI, you are still not given the model,
Yeah.
right? You are just only given a API call,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
endpoint, and that endpoint is not under your control, it is with somebody
Hmm.
else's control.
Yeah.
Now, so of course they don't use, like the legally they
Like.
say that, okay, we won't use the data. But when you go to the legal clauses, the privacy aspect of it, security aspect, they say it is your responsibility. We are not responsible for it. Naturally, they cannot take responsibility, right? They say that we are a data processor or a sub-processor. You are the data fiduciary or the controller. You have to ensure that whatever is to be done, you have to take care of. Then that strikes the companies, right? Oh, I cannot give data to them. I cannot call the model for sensitive, like for initial basic applications, probably I can. But as I go deeper, it is very difficult for me to use this. So I need to have something in house. So they start transitioning into a open model, and then open model they cannot consume directly, right? Llama would not know anything about how a bank basically works, right? Now they would have got certain level of experience of API front-end integration and things like those, but when they start becoming a shaper, right, they understand that okay, I have to train with this amount of data, I have to do a knowledge search on this amount of data, and then based on that only I can serve my customer. And the knowledge has to be contextual, and then a lot of things, right? While these things are like, there is LangChain and bunch of other services that you can do. Now this is where agentic thing comes in, right? Where you can put in agents, and there are like frameworks which are coming where you can use an agentic architecture with MCP, which can, where you can have multiple services interacting with it. Probably now the context window is also becoming larger, so it can look into larger volume of data, but not like the entire database, but a few million tokens can be looked at today. Even that is like very, very large. Now when that is possible, then a lot of use cases open up, because the model is local, security is guaranteed, right? But the problem is slightly different in terms of a shaper. The problem is, now you are exposing all your data to API which is coming from the external world, right? Now an attacker can come, and through prompts he can put an attack and extract all sensitive information out of the model or out of your bank. So till now you have been putting multiple layers of firewall to your database, right? Now with Gen AI exposed to the internet, and your database is connected to your model, you are exposing your entire database to the internet, right, through the model. Now this becomes another problem. So this is the dilemma that enterprises have, that oh shit, now for it to make meaningful inference, it requires data.
Yeah.
Right? For example, customer says that I'm traveling abroad, I want this forex exchange, or I want to apply for this loan for my daughter's education. Can you, tell me what is the process? So for all of this, specific personal account related information has to be exposed to the model.
Yeah.
Right? Now when you expose it, I can, like as an attacker, I can say that, hey, I'm trying to help this person, she's finding a
Yeah.
lot of difficulty, right? Can you, if you can provide this information, I'll be able to help her better. She is not able to go to school, college, whatever, like, like try to hoodwink the model and try to get information from the model. Now this is also possible, right? Now this becomes a bigger problem. Now how do you limit it? How do you ensure that model does not go ahead and start giving lectures about things that it should not speak about, right? Agents, start speaking about, let us say, some actresses matrimonial problems or geopolitics, right? Which is not intended, right? So how do you ensure that models don't go outside the context, and ensure that they speak in the area of interest for which they are serving, right? So this becomes a major problem. So how do you control it? How do you put guardrails? And similarly, when the user is putting sensitive information in, especially when the model is outside, right? Protecting the privacy is a very big challenge. And if the model is inside, attacks may come and then extract information. Protecting that is a big problem. And so hence the problems of privacy, safety, security becomes very, very critical for model deployment. So
Okay.
that's the
Okay.
challenge that enterprises have to handle.
Okay, and that's interesting, right? So let's say, I mean, Abhilash, let's say essentially the organization has decided, ki chalo, we have to, given all the risks that we've just mentioned, we have to do essentially model deployment in-house, and for that, there needs to be essentially sort of like training and model fine-tuning, among other things, right? So um, is there anything that enterprise should do, especially in the data collection stage itself, that they need to be mindful of as they essentially be ready, as they get ready for essentially leveraging Gen AI in their own context locally, or in their in their limited into their organization, on them whatever you call, right? So is there anything that you feel key they should keep in mind as they do the data collection, to make sure key data that is collected is primed for training and fine-tuning the model?
Absolutely. So a model is like a kid, right?
Hmm,
It can easily be, hoodwinked. It can be easily be misled. It may accidentally blurt out sensitive information which it should not speak outside the house, right? All those things. So how do you put guardrails around this kid and ensure
hmm,
that it is, it is taken care of the right way, right? That's a very big concern. Now, in this process, first to start with is, if you use abusive language at house, right? The kid is gonna go out and then use abusive language. Very simple. So, if you use privacy preserved data at training level, right? Model will not know only what sensitive information is, and then it will not have the opportunity to speak about it in the external world, because whatever it gets trained on, it's going to speak about it. You have no controls on it. So what is important is, when you are sharing data or when you are doing data collection itself, you do privacy preservation of data or security controls against data poisoning kind of things before even you start sharing data for model training. Because once you are given data to model training, you are gone. You cannot do much, right? Your regulatory obligations also of right to access, right to modification, right to deletion, all apply for only personal data, right? The moment the data is non-personal, it is exempted from privacy regulations. Hence, the data, you can make the data non-personal, like, synthetic data is a best example. Synthetic data, differential privacy, and things like those. You can use these technologies to make the data non-personal and then use that data for model training. This way, you can justify DPIA, you can get clearance at the DPIA level, then you can do AI impact assessment. That also has to be done, and then you need to get legal clearance from the responsible AI office, um, right? So you have to ensure that you put these protections in place so that tomorrow there is no obligation on you from privacy or security perspective, for the model that you have trained. So at the data collection level, you understand the risk in data, mitigate the risk in data, show that to your DPO or responsible AI officer, whoever is in, legally responsible in your ecosystem, get their clearance, and then start using the data for model training. Teja, I think you are on mute.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
So I mean, obviously, the next step after this, essentially the conceptualization to training, is definitely the deployment of the actual model, right? So, um, let's say essentially an organization has selected the model and then they trained it. How should they go about deploying the model in their context, so that that same thing can be used for, let's say, servicing the customers or inferring in information from the customers, right? So how should they go about doing this, Abhilash?
Got it. Before deployment, one very important thing has to be done post
Hmm,
data collection is the model red teaming. That
hmm,
is, you are going to deploy. Let's say it's like, you have 20 kids in a classroom, right?
hmm,
Um, so, or things like Mahabharata. Let's say, bunch of people who are at Dronacharya. They have been trained by Dronacharya. Now he has to deploy somebody for a specific war situation, right?
yeah.
Now he needs to test that person, if the test that person will be able to withstand and win that war, right? He has to give some tests. Now, what are those tests? Is AI red teaming? So now these tests can be done manually as well, which is the worst possible way of doing it, because you cannot understand what the model is going to speak, and then you there may be like 20 models, and you will have to ask so many questions to even understand. So it's like very difficult process. But that should be a escalation process for it, right? So the latest thing in this area is AI red teaming, where you can do attack simulation on model, understand for different aspects. For example, privacy. How do you do a privacy attack on a model, right? How do you do security attack on a model? How do you do jailbreak attack on a model, right? And how do you do safety, make the model speak some safety related issues, things like those, right? So when you do this, you get to know which model in these responsible AI parameters. There are different parameters like password, which is privacy, accountability, safety, security, fairness, explainability, reliability, sustainability. You try to test the model in these dimensions, and then and this can be dynamic, because based on one question answer, how do you do interview or interrogation, right? Based on what somebody is saying, then subsequent questions have to be built in that flow, so that you are able to corner somebody somewhere, right? Now, can a model or an agent do this against a model, right? So it is basically a model trying to corner another model in these
Model.
different aspects of responsible AI attributes, and say that okay, and score the model, saying that okay, this model in privacy it is this score, in security this is the score of the model, and then you will have bunch of attributes. And based on this, now you can choose amongst the model garden, or a spectrum of model that you have, which is the best model for you to deploy. And this is a very important requirement. Once you do this, you do AI impact assessment on top of it, and then say that okay, this model is good. These are the levels of risks that it carries, which we are okay with. Or for these risks, these are the guardrails we will have to put at the deployment stage, right? So once you understand this, is when next comes the deployment scenario, where in the deployment, what kind of guardrail should you put around it? Like if personal data goes out to the model, or if it is sending out some sensitive information or inappropriate information, or user is trying to do some attack, right? How do you understand it and block it? How do you ensure that you don't store any sensitive information locally? And how do you do a governance reporting on top of it? Like, how has the model been working? What kind of risks have been coming to the model? What kind of mitigations are we doing? Right? What kind of awareness we'll have to do? All these are responsibilities of the model deployer, right? Or whoever is a model based service provider, or the model based fiduciary here. Right? So, though it seems like very easy from outside, so these are the challenges that you have, and for this you will have to put these guardrails in place, like for safety, security, fairness, privacy. You'll have to put some guardrails around the model, and then put a governance layer on top of it to understand that okay, this is how this has to be protected and monitored on a continuous basis.
Okay. You've briefly touched upon essentially model governance, right? So essentially, I want to double click on what you just said. So, I mean, having deployed, I mean, going through the entire development cycle and then essentially deploying the model is one thing, but essentially governing and ensuring it is giving responses the way it is expected to, that's a whole different beast altogether, right? So what do you think are some of the challenges as people essentially go through the model deployment and then essentially try to govern these models, right? So what are some of the challenges that you see, Abilash, in model governance in the industry?
Absolutely. So the governance part includes the whole spectrum that we spoke about. While post deployment obligations are high, very high, because it's like ongoing, right?
Yeah.
These many of these things you do on a periodic basis, but post
Yeah.
deployment is ongoing. So
Yeah.
I would say, while as you rightly said, post deployment is like 50-60% of the job, while pre-deployment, data collection, you have to do certain things, you need to do DPA at the end of it. So each of the stages has a regulatory governance obligation. At the end of data collection, you need to do DPIA, and you need to have a record of it. Then when you do model training, post model training, you have to provide like what are the risk scores of different models, how did you mitigate it. For example, you may have to retrain, or you'll have to scrap a model and take a new model, right? So things like those, and then deploy. So for all these you need to have proofs and records, which is an important requirement in terms of transparency for any AI deployment. And then in the deployment, you have to track what kind of risks are coming. For example, people are putting code into external models, or people are putting sensitive organizational information or confidential information into external models, or internal models are getting attacked this way. Things like those, right? Summarize it and say that okay, these kind of risks have been identified. Please communicate to the internal or external parties, whoever is using, that these kind of risks are present. These have to be mitigated, and put guardrails in such a way that those guardrails are protected. And this is a ongoing thing, like firewalls, right? You keep configuring, optimizing the configuration on a regular basis, generating regular reports saying that these are the risks identified. Present these risks to the board, saying that okay, this is how AI deployment was done. These are the risk identified. These are the risk mitigated. These are the residual risk, and then this is how we plan to solve these problems downstream, right? If at all there is some breach where you had put some guardrails, but the guardrails were like overcome, then there may be separate breach obligations. If it is privacy related, security related, then all the existing regulations apply to these breaches as well. So you have to take care of that as well. So organizations, while they definitely don't have the option that okay, I'm going to block GenAI in my ecosystem, right? They cannot completely open it up as well. But the right way is to find a good middle path of what kind of guardrails and governance have to be put in place, and how it has to be nurtured into a mature GenAI culture in the organization.
Okay. So, I mean, that's very powerful thing that you just mentioned, right? Essentially, nurture the Gen AI adoption in the organization. So, my parting question to you, Abilash, is essentially, I mean, people say ki whoever essentially adopts. I mean, I just read. I don't know how much of it is true, but one person said ki his entire marketing team in his company is him plus I think around 6 to 8 different agents, and then he's getting the agents to all the work that essentially his employees were supposed to do, right? So it's only I mean whoever sort of like adopts these models in the context, I mean definitely have a good advantage, right? So in this so what in this context, right, how can Indian companies adopt Gen AI to be successful in this entire Gen AI adoption journey? If you can give us some interesting things that you interesting stories, interesting pointers that you feel Kiwi everyone should know, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. So see, now that we were speaking about the LLM part till now, right?
Yeah.
Let's speak about agent, because you spoke about agents, right? Agents are models like LLMs with capability to manage tool, do planning, and take do reasoning on top of it, and take
Yeah.
decisions on top of it, right? Which any given task, it can break it down into steps, plan for
Yeah.
it, use tools with different kinds of protocols which are emerging, and then subsequently deliver like with a goal oriented objective to problem solving, and solve those problems for businesses. Now the problems pretty much remain the same. This is more like a wrapper with additional capabilities, but the fundamental problem remains the same. How is data used in these ecosystems? And this is a very big challenge in enterprises. If let us say you are a model building organization, you are serving a large customer, right? The first thing he will say is, hey, I cannot give you data. Where are you deploying your model? Right? Let us say you are serving an ICICI Bank or JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, right? They will first say, okay, what is the model that you are using? Are you using DeepSeek, or like are you using Llama, right? And each of them will have different connotations, right? Are you deploying it in-house or external? What kind of agent is this? What kind of risks can I come up with these agents? Is it
Yeah.
safe to deploy? Is the first question any enterprise will ask, right? While a lot of us focus on the utility and the business value, it is like it is like building a fast car without a seat belt
Hmm.
or a brake or a
Hmm.
gear, right? Where because the whole point is the faster you go,
Hmm.
sooner will you should you be able to control
Hmm.
and control safely, right? Without controls and safety, the faster you go, you will end up with a major accident. Same is with either agentic or or a LLM based approach for enterprise solutions, because you won't even get access to data to deploy your
Hmm.
ecosystem, or it will be rejected point blank to start with. So
Hmm.
all major services. So we are working with some
Hmm.
large analytics companies,
Hmm.
global
Hmm.
in nature, and they are serving larger global customers,
Hmm.
and building Gen AI services for them. The fundamental thing is that the downstream company, it can be a large healthcare company or a large banking company, they don't want the data to touch the model till the time they are absolutely clear that the
Correct.
model
Correct.
is the risks are clearly known. And till the time the risks are clearly known, they don't even want to engage. So
Hmm.
anybody in India, and we want to serve the planet, what is very very critical is that right from step one, if we follow
Hmm.
the obligations and build
Hmm.
the whole, at the conceptualization stage, data collection, model training, model development, model deployment, and governance, if we ensure that we ensure the responsible AI principles
Hmm.
across this, right? And it is not very high. Probably it may be 5% of your overall budget. But when
Hmm.
we invest that 5%, right, the returns are significantly high. It gives a strategic advantage, gives a huge leg up against most of the competition in the market, and enables you to play across the world,
Hmm.
right? In a very compliant way. So that's the strategic advantage.
Okay. Okay, that's quite powerful note that you ended this on. Essentially, 5% investment can go essentially a long way in terms of returns, and essentially will position you to just not serve essentially the existing market but also globally. So with that, I want to thank Abilash for covering such an in-depth and for sharing with us with such an in-depth understanding, and then how should one enterprise adopt Gen AI in their context, not just from essentially just consuming what open models, open AI or any other model that we have, but not just from there, but actually how what should they do about when they go about building the whole thing in house, right? So that's such a good learning shared and knowledge shared with Abilash from Abilash, and I want to thank Abilash. It's always a pleasure to have you engage with us, and we look forward to essentially seeing more of what you do, and then how you can help. In case if any of the participants essentially wants to have any comments, anything, then we'd be happy to engage with you, Abhilash and I. Abhilash, before we go, just there are a couple of comments that couple of questions that we have from the audience, and I would like to take those, and then if you have time, then we will close the session. So first question is from Jagannath. So what are the scoring methodologies available to score the models? If there's any methodologies that you know of.
Absolutely. So there are multiple frameworks, especially in terms of
Hmm.
the explainability side of things. There are different frameworks which are available. There are multiple leaderboards also available. For example, currently we are working, planning to, as part of the India AI mission,
Hmm.
um, we are like suddenly certain publications will be made. I don't want to break it now, but so we are, we will be working with some French organizations in, coming up with some frameworks for this.
Hmm.
So there are some standards
Hmm.
which are emerging. In terms of explainability, there are some scoring mechanisms. In terms of privacy, there is privacy threat modeling which is coming up. In terms of
Hmm.
security, there are certain Gen AI security risk scoring mechanisms which are coming, like
Hmm.
OASP top 10 for AI adversarial training. So while for reliability and explainability, there are certain frameworks which are coming. The responsible AI side of things, there are very interesting scoring mechanisms coming like privacy threat modeling, which quantifies the risk in data for both structured and unstructured data. Similarly, for security, there are some frameworks which are emerging, not a specific scoring mechanism for security of the model, but these are like there are certainly certain ones which are coming up. Then similarly, fairness is a very broad
Hmm.
topic. um, there is no definition of fairness, so fairness is not very well recognized. But
Hmm.
the DPIA part of it, or AI impact assessment part of it, is like, for example, there are certain frameworks or scoring mechanisms in the AI impact assessment area where you put these PASPER attributes, and then score for each of these attributes of privacy, accountability, safety, security,
Hmm.
um, in the different aspects, score separately, and then aggregate it, right? So that is also shaping up. So these are shaping up. I won't say there is a single scoring mechanism out there covering all
Hmm.
aspects, but for individual attributes there are mechanisms which are coming up.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. This one very last question, Abhilash, I just want a request if you can be quick, right? Although I don't think you can, but please try to see what you can do. So, what kind of testing one must do to assess a model end to end and responsible AI practices? Are there any tools available for the same that are outside of risk assessment frameworks?
Absolutely. So that, I'm glad we have this question from Jagannath. Jagannath has been always
Jagannath.
very, is a thought leader from the industry. He understands the
Yeah.
domain really well. So really great to see, because I think he's working with multiple problems in hand. So one of the so this is we saw the same problem with our customers as well. They were asking for this
Hmm.
problem statement, right? And how do we solve for it? Um, so that this is what I was mentioning about AI red teaming.
Hmm.
So when you do AI red teaming, you can do attack simulation on models for different principles of responsible AI. That's exactly what Jagannath is asking. So
Hmm.
for different principles like privacy, you can do privacy attack simulation on a model. Then for security, you can do security attack simulation on model. Safety, things like those, right? So you can identify principles, and for those principles, you can do attack simulation on model, and based on the level of success or failure, you can
Hmm.
score a model, saying that this is a good model or this is a appropriate model for your scenario. And there are tools available. Tools are emerging. In fact, we are going to launch in Paris next week
Hmm.
a very important announcement on this, where we are building an agentic solution for model assessment. So, request people who have joined the session to closely monitor this space, who are interested in the testing part of it. So, we are going to launch a very interesting agentic tool for AI model assessment.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, so, I mean, although I would want to chat with Abhilash a bit more, but in the interest of time, we'll have to end it here. But this doesn't have to be the end of the discussion. Abhilash will certainly be present at our FinSec, at our Innovation Arcade at FinSec, which is happening in Mumbai on 4th and 5th. We invite all of you to partner to come to our Innovation Arcade and then interact with us and learn more about AI practices to session, and
Okay,
I look forward to seeing some of you, or hopefully all of you, at FinSec, and especially at Innovation Arcade. Thank you, Abhilash, for all your time and all your sharing your learning so far.
absolutely. It was pleasure interacting with you, Teja, and thank you for great questions from the audience as well. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure interacting. Looking forward to meet you folks in FinSec and have longer conversations on this, and also we'll see if we can get you some sneak peek into AI red teaming and mitigation solutions during the FinSec. Thank you for hosting. Pleasure interacting as usual.
Thank you.